Today on Coding 101, we are finishing up C# for now with all things objects and classes.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Coding 101 is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
Welcome to Coding 101. It's the show where we give you the knowledge to enter the world of the Code Monkey. I'm Father Robert Ballecer.
And I'm Shannon Morris, and we are going to get you all coded up on everything this week on C#, I believe.
You know, Shannon, it's kind of sad.
I know.
This is the end for C#.
This is our last week. Well, for now.
For now, right? We could always come back.
I think we should revisit it in the future because I've had a lot of fun with C#.
Yeah, it is
so much.
Especially the last episode. When you start taking all that rudimentary knowledge and you put it into a graphical box, I think a lot of people get excited because they realize, oh, this is an app. This is something I could sell.
That's true. Now, speaking of those graphical boxes, aka Windows Presentation Foundations, I got really confused.
Yeah. So here's the thing to remember about any sort of framework, especially when we're dealing with a visual programming language. You got to remember that it can't just be coding by keyboard anymore. A lot of old geeks, and I'm saying we're old geeks. So it's not an old geek, right? Not an ageist thing. We remember typing on a command line, right?
Yes.
We remember putting together a script and such. Well, in object-oriented programming, that doesn't work so well anymore because we are building objects. We're not just building functions. We're not just building sections of codes. We're building entire objects, and objects work better in an IDE, an integrated developer environment that includes the windows and the buttons and all the little things that you can get from your IDE and drop on. That's the issue that I think a lot of people were having with working with the framework.
It makes it a little bit harder because you're working with more than just one file, which I noticed. And you're working with more than just one piece of code. You're working with several different pieces that you stick all together on this pretty little picture, and you can press buttons.
And now you know why we started with the console, because with the console we can just give you all of the code. It comes on one page, and as long as you take that code and you copy it exactly into your IDE, it's going to work. But when you start dealing with an object, when you start dealing with something like using Foundations or any sort of framework, there's going to be multiple files. If you looked at our GitHub for the last episode, there was one for the app, there was one for main, and then there was the XAML files that you also had to copy over correctly. A lot of people freaked out.
Like me.
Yeah, right? Because it is a little different.
You see all those different files and you start going, oh, wait, where did Lou say to put this one? I don't know.
Yeah. So here's what I want to offer. Whenever we start getting into the higher level of programming, when we get past that episode 5 or 6, what you really want to do is our code examples are just that. They're now just examples. It's not going to be how your code's going to look. If you try to copy and paste that straight into your developer, it's probably not going to turn out all that well. Once we get up to this level, what you really want to do is you want to watch the episodes, you want to use the code as an example, but then you want to make your own. What Lou was showing us was a really simple way to use Foundations to make a button. And in making a button, you made essentially a new class or a new function, a new object, a new procedure. Yes, which is why we're going to talk about that right now.
Okay, well, before we get into that, I have a couple of viewer submissions that I would like to share with
let's
everybody.
do that. Oh, we love that. Homework. Bring the homework.
We love sharing the homework. So as usual, if you guys have any information, any code that you want to share with us, you can always go over to our Google Plus community, and we'll have a link in the show notes for where that Google Plus community is. It's called Coding 101, and we have a whole area for you guys to share your code on GitHub. So if we jump over to my computer, I can show you a couple of different ones that were released this week. So our first one comes from Dean T. And Dean T decided to show us a bank emulator ATM that lets you deposit and withdraw your money. So if I pull up my Visual Studio, you'll see my app section has changed a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and open my project. And this is, let's find it, episode 8, example 1. Here we go. And I'm going to hit start. So this is a very, very simple, rudimentary idea of how much money do you have in your bank right now. I'm going to say I have $7,000 in my bank. I wish. And then I want to withdraw money, so I'll hit number 2. How much do you want to withdraw? I'm going to say 1,000. I wish an ATM would give me that much money. And then it says, I'm going to check my balance now to make sure the math is correct. So now I have $6,000, and you can continue through that. So it just gives you an idea of a little way that you can use this to check your balances with your ATM. How cute.
And what I like about that is we're always telling people to take real world problems, right?
Yes.
And this is actually a real world problem. And you can imagine that an actual ATM's programming is probably a bit more complicated than that.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's generally the same procedure, right? You have something that indicates balance, you have something that gives you a menu system, you have something that allows you to either withdraw or deposit money, and
That's true.
that's what he built.
So our second one comes from Joe. So Joe sent in this really interesting one. It is a WPF code all in one file. So you can use his directions, which are located at our Google Plus community, to get it running on your own Visual Studio compiler. His program is going to show you Coding 101 with a simple background, and every time you click your mouse, it's going to change the colors.
Love stuff like this. Come on, this is just simple.
And it is very simple, and anybody can write this. And with his code, he did have a couple of interesting things in here, like, for example, you had to click on the name of the project and go to Add References. Now, we haven't gotten into references too much, but we had to add a couple of different references to get this to work. So the way I understand this are these are types of files that are built in that you have to check mark to get that compilation to jump over to your code.
Right, exactly. So this is what we were talking about when we talked about frameworks. This is essentially the same idea, including code that has already been written, that has been made available for us to play with.
Right.
Again, this is different from old geeks because, as you know, most of us old geeks worked in early programming languages where if you were going to use it, you had to build it.
Yep.
Right. Now you could go your entire programming life without writing 10,000 lines of code.
Right.
You could just use the pieces of code that other people have built to you to have the desired effect. That's what our audience is picking up on. I like that.
I do too. It's really interesting. And also, Dean shared a second one, which is basically an RSS handler for Coding 101. So the second one, he also used some of those added references. For his example, he used system.xml and then system.servicemodel.syndication that you had to add it. Now, when I tried to run this on my computer, I didn't have that option under my references, that system services syndication, but I went ahead and ran it with just system services, and it worked fine. So I'm able to run this, and it gives me the last episode that we showed, which is Runtime Fun Time, the link to PodTrack so you can download it. And then if you want to see any other episode, you can click on any key. So I'm just going to put U, enter, and it shows me the last episode before that, episode 6, Coding 101, Padre and Snubs, and on and on. Of course, I can hit Q and then quit.
I like that. And again, so this is one of these programs that's showing you about taking external data.
Yes.
And anytime we have a software, a piece of code that pulls in external data, all sorts of exciting things can happen, right?
So fun.
Yeah, because now you're no longer limited just to the stuff that you've hard-coded into the system. You're now pulling from something else. We love that.
That's really cool.
Good job.
So, of course, as usual, thank you guys so much for sharing your input and your codes on there. And I'm learning a lot from you as well, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, I know we lost a lot of people, right? Like
me.
Yeah, and that's okay. This is how learning works. Sometimes we jump ahead and you get kind of freaked out and we pull back. So we're going to pull back a little bit on this episode, this last episode for C#, and we want to make sure that people have a clear understanding of what object-oriented programming is, because we're now moving past the console, right?
Yes.
And once we move past the console, you really have to understand what objects are. You really have to understand what classes are. We tried to keep people away from it because we didn't want to lose people in the first episode, right?
You don't want to freak people out.
Exactly. Like, you know, remember that first episode, we were getting some very good comments, but also some people who were saying, well, I wouldn't do anything until you teach people what a class is and why there's no functions in C#. That's all true.
And those are the more advanced people that already understand it.
But the reason why we started with the console was we wanted people to be able to have something they could get their hands on, that they could understand before we moved into something like classes.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Classes.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go. All right.
All right, I'm ready.
So, in the last episode, we talked about the object-oriented language approach. And we talked about how it was different than traditional programming, right? Because in traditional programming, you have your code, and then you have your data. And the two were separate, right? You had
Right.
code that processed data, but they were always kept in different places. They were always kept in different variables. You didn't really conflate the two. Object-oriented programming came about in a time when people started realizing the easiest way to program is to mimic the real world, right? Instead of telling people, well, you're going to have to start thinking of the world in a different way, why not give them a tool? Why not give them a structure? Why not give them a framework that they can build that will let them combine objects out of the real world and come up with sort of a template?
Oh, that's cool.
That's what a class is.
So it's like a blueprint.
It's a blueprint. Oh, great. Perfect. That's what
Yeah?
we're going to call it from now.
Okay.
A class is a blueprint.
Okay,
right?
perfect.
Okay,
Got it.
now, here's the thing. We're going to start talking about programming classes, but if you look back at the GitHub, in fact, go to my computer right now, Brian, and you're going to see that we have actually been using classes forever and ever. This is from episode 5, and we've got a class right here. We had a class called episode 005. All of the work that we've been doing has been these methods, have been these procedures inside of classes. And like you said, what a class is a blueprint for an object.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so we've been using classes all along.
Just haven't
we
known
just
it.
didn't know it.
Yeah, you trusted us. You trusted us, and this is why we brought you here.
Cool.
How about
Okay.
that? All right, so now, just like any blueprint, a class doesn't actually mean anything until it becomes an object.
Okay.
Right? Because
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, you just have your thing on paper.
You have your thing on
can't
paper,
really
right.
do anything with it.
Precisely. So like a blueprint, I've got all my drawings. I know where everything's going to go. Let's say it's for a house. I know where my walls are, where my pipes are going to be, where the doors and the windows are. And that's great. I might be able to visualize.
It doesn't do anything until you build it.
You have to build it, right? And so what we have is when we deal with classes, we have to, I'm going to call it initialize. We're going to initialize. We're going to create the object just like we create a variable, right? We have to create a variable to allocate memory. Well, when you do that with a class, you suddenly turn it from a blueprint into an object.
Ooh.
I know. Again,
And that's
now,
where the fun begins.
That's where the fun begins. Now, this really easily. So this is the most basic type of way to describe a class. A class starts with the attributes, goes to the modifiers, goes to the identifier, and then the type. Now, anything in brackets is really optional.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I don't have to put those things. There's defaults. There's different ways of using these individual pieces of data to specify what kind of class that you're creating and who can access the data inside of the class. But this one is really the only one that's essential.
The identifier.
And then, just like every function that you've ever built, within these brackets, I'm going to have the body. And inside of this body will be everything contained within those blueprints, everything that's contained within that class.
And that body is a lot of the information we've already learned.
Right, exactly. So what I'd like you to do is, Brian, if you could go ahead and let's erase this really quick, and I'm going to show you a simple class as soon as I find out what happened to our eraser. I think our eraser has flown the coop. So you know what? I'm going to write it below it. Forget that. We're just going to do this. The most simple class I can think of is something that looks like this. I'm going to call it class. I'm going to call it class Padre. So I have a class called Padre, and then I'm going to put something in the body, and it's going to look a little bit like this. Console, right line, and hello.
Hello.
Okay,
So it prints hello.
Exactly, right? So
simple.
right now, there's nothing in here that you haven't seen before, except I would encapsulate this console right line inside of a function, and then maybe a couple of other functions, and then maybe a few more functions, and then maybe a few more variables, and then maybe a few more commands and methods that I want to contain within this blueprint. Now, this is not actually going to work. Again, this is pseudocode, right?
Yes.
But I want to show you that you've seen something like this before. Anytime we've dealt with a function, we've seen this structure. The structure for a class is not all that much different. So I'm only doing this to make people say, please don't freak out. Please don't,
Okay.
don't freak out. Now, I will show you something that would work. Go ahead and switch over to my computer, Brian, and you're going to see, I don't want to write this, so I just went ahead and put it in the Google Doc. If we're going to populate a class template with members, I want to do something like this. I've got a class called Padre Says Hello.
Okay.
Then inside of it, I'm going to create a function called print hello. And inside that function, I'm going to make it say hello Twit Army. So that's all it does. This class is a blueprint, which includes a function called print hello that allows me to print Twit Army hello.
Ah, okay.
But that blueprint, I need to actually declare it. I need to actually use it. I need to turn it into an object. And the way that I turn it into an object is by actually calling it. And Brian, if you could go ahead and switch back to the computer again, I'm going to show you this line right here would declare, it would create an object called Twit of the type Padre says hello. And then this line right here, twit.printHello, would actually call the function inside that new object that tells it to say hello.
Okay, explain that in layman's terms.
Okay, in layman's terms, What I just did by creating this, I created a blueprint.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah, I got that far.
Okay, created a blueprint. Now,
you have a function
I need to
inside of
turn
it.
the blueprint into an object. So, but I could have multiple objects with this blueprint. This particular blueprint that I created was called Twit.
Yes.
Okay? Now, with that new object created from this blueprint, I can call the functions inside that object and make it do stuff.
Oh.
Right?
Cool.
Is that easy to understand?
That makes sense.
I think that's pretty much as simple as I can make it. I know sometimes I kind of talk around myself because I'm in my head. But does chat room, listen to me. Does that make sense? I mean, does it make sense to create something, an object, and then use the functions that are inside of that object? Because essentially that's all I'm doing.
That's really cool.
When I'm creating an object out of that blueprint.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah. It's cool, but you know what? I understand that we still need someone who can actually show us how it works. So, how about this? For the last time, at least for a while, you want to call our code warrior?
I think we should. Let's call him up. What's up, Lou?
Hey, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Lou Maresca. He has been with us since episode 1 of Coding 101. He is our code warrior. He works for Microsoft, and he is an all-around lovable geek. And by the way, if you love his code, you're going to love how he makes his hair look like that. It's amazing. It really, really is. Now, Lou, we had people kind of freak out over this, over the foundation, because it was the first time that we actually started calling classes, objects. It was the first time that we used a framework. What we want you to do is we want you to back up a little bit. We want you to take the theory that we just gave them and actually show them how it works inside the IDE.
Sure. So one of the things that people don't realize is their coding previously, like before C# and so on, was a lot of what they call procedural code, where a lot of functions and methods were kind of like all over the place and people were calling them. And they just get what they call spaghetti code over time, where trying to follow one strand of spaghetti in a big bowl of spaghetti is sometimes tough to do. So, so that's why somebody came up with what they call object-oriented programming, which is what you described to everybody. And it's basically setting up an object or a class in this sense to describe something. And so like what I want to show people is show like a very simple class like you were showing Padre, where like, let's say I wanted to describe a car, right? And in a car, there's different ways, there's different things that I can add in here. Like for instance, if I wanted to describe a car, let's say I wanted to return its color. There's two ways to do that in a class. There's what they call a field, which is just a variable or a global variable. And I can do that by just, creating a variable here of type string, and it's called color, and I set it to blue. And now
actually, Lou, we need to stop there because we never talked about a global variable. So what we have to explain is when we're talking about variables within a function, right? Those are variables that only exist within that function, right? We can return something using the return command. Lou is doing it a different way. What he's saying is there is a way to create a variable that exists everywhere. It exists outside of that function. So if I change it, another function, another piece of code can still access it.
Okay.
Right. So this is just what we call a global variable because it sits outside all the functions. So what I was going to show is real quick. I can show here. I can add a function which doesn't return anything. So we're going to do the void. I'm going to say I want it to honk, and in this case, I'm just going to do a beep. And so now I have something that describes a car. Yeah. So this is really easy. So it describes a car, and it returns its color, and we actually now have a honk. And like I think what you showed an example is now in order for me to use this class up here in my console program, I have to say, hey, okay, I have this new type called car, and sometimes we have string, sometimes we have, int, but in this case, now we have a new type we created called car, and I'm just going to make a lowercase version of that. And then I'm going to say, I want a new version, I want a new car, I'm going to spin up a new one. So I'm going to spin up a new one. And now I have an instance of the car. If you notice, if I actually click this, IntelliSense is telling me, okay, you can return the color and you can honk it.
Right.
That's
so
awesome.
remember when we were doing the early programming and we were telling people, if you look at your compiler, if you look at your IDE,
yes.
as you start to type commands, it will drop down a menu of everything that's available, right?
It'll let you know the different options that you can use so you don't make errors and you
Exactly,
don't make typos.
exactly. Well, what Lou just showed you was that inside that IDE, in the new class that he just created, in the new instance,
It automatically knows.
it knows what's in there, it knows those functions, and it lets you choose it in the drop-down menu.
That's so cool.
Right. So and I can pretty much add unlimited functionality here if I wanted to. The car, you know, I could have it do other things. I could have it return how many different features of that car and stuff like that. So basically, I could set all of that up for car. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to show another type of thing inside of a class that kind of a lot of C# users or developers use, and it's very convenient. And it's called a property. And a property is the same thing. It's kind of an attribute, and it's pretty much the same thing as a field or a variable, but instead it's a function in itself. And so, like, for instance, I wanted to return color, a property would look like this. So if I'm going to capitalize it, and instead of returning it like a variable here, there's two little things I can stick in here called a get and set methods. And this might seem a little confusing, but what it does is if I go up here now and do this, you'll see that there's a bigger guy called color in here.
Oh.
And so now, instead of using it like a variable where I say, hey, look, I want it to be blue, I can do the exact same thing with the big guy and say I want it to be blue. And the key here is the reason for properties is so you can put a middleman in between this equal. So the middleman meaning when I do this here, it actually goes down to this set method and says, okay, what do you want to do with the value that you're getting here? Do you want to just set it? So in this case, I can just set this variable like this. Or do you want to do something else with it before you set it? So there's other things that you can do, and in this case, I want to return the color here.
Right. Now, folks, before you start freaking out, because I know there's some people in the chat room who are already going, wait, what? In fact, Joe is saying, wait a minute, you're showing global variables to noobs. I actually would agree with that. Typically, I don't tell people to use global variables. It's a very bad process because it
Right.
tends to lead to lazy programming. Lou's just doing it for demonstration, but
right.
if you do make a program, if there's any way for you to avoid using a global variable, please do, because again, we want to enforce best practices. Folks, what he's trying to do here is just show you how you add functions to your list. Just like you were talking about, where you were adding the capabilities in that menu, right? You're adding the capabilities of a new framework. You're adding the capabilities of a new include. What Lou is doing is he's building a class which will let him play with the properties and the functions of that class after he's created an object.
Yes.
Right. So, and I agree. I think I even posted on Google Plus a little blurb. I got on my soapbox for a second and talked about global variables, and so
They're evil.
They're evil. They really are. And this, what I wanted to show though is normally what people do is they do these public properties instead of global variables, and the reason is you can do a lot of other functionality in here that's in between the equals, and so that makes it seems like I'm setting a variable to blue, but really what I'm doing is I'm calling this other function down here called set. And then it sets the value in here. And then notice what I did is I actually removed, there used to be public here, and I removed that. And now if I go back up here, if I try to set the color, it says, oh, wait, it's not there anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, basically because it's not public for me to set it anymore.
Right. So those attributes that we were playing with that we always kind of ignore because we just use the default, this is where you can actually use them. If you have an attribute, if you have a property, if you have a function that you only want accessible in one part of the code and not in another, that's when you can start playing with public or private. That's when you can start saying, you know what, I want everything to have access to this, or I only want the internal functions to be able to access this.
That does make sense if you're doing a really, really long code and you have to use similar names for all sorts of different functions.
Yeah, yeah.
It makes sense that you would want to make certain ones private so that you're not screwing up and getting errors.
Exactly right, exactly. That's the perfect example. If you're going to have something that you're dealing with across a lot of different classes, a lot of different functions within those classes, you kind of want to make those private. You want to make that that is specific to that instance, to
Right.
whatever you're doing with it at that moment. Because if you make it public, now everything can access it. And if you've forgotten that in line 4000, you had
Yes,
previously
exactly.
used that, now the code's going to interact.
Everything breaks.
Everything breaks. and you just scratch your head and go, but it looks right. And it's because that function you wrote 6 weeks ago is now interfering with your code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is kind of a deep dive, but I wanted to kind of give, since it's the last class, I wanted to kind of give an overview of what C# developers do to kind of clean up their code when it comes to developing stuff. In this case, I used a car as a class example, but some of the main capabilities of, like you were saying, is properties and fields, and also accessors hiding it, being able to hide things from other people using it. So like now if I actually hit IntelliSense, all I see is the color and the honk functions that I added, and then these other ones that are in here are just stuff that the framework adds to it, to objects, things of type thing, what they call objects. So this is pretty much, this is a class, an object, and a program all in itself right here, and it's only 30 lines of code. So it's a fairly simple example, but you can make it very complex. And obviously over time, a lot of people, what they do is they separate their classes into other files. So for instance, I can add like a car.cs file, and then I would just put the class in that file, and now I have separate classes in separate files. And that allows me to clean up the code and make it very simple. So then all I would have in this file is this, and that's it.
Right.
So what happens if you run that?
So nothing actually.
Yeah,
but
okay.
Yeah, it's
but if
like there's
I'll
no
put
bright line
a
or
breakpoint here. Yeah, you've ever seen this before, a breakpoint? And what you'll see is now if I hover over this little car variable, if I even look down here in my locals, actually I'll hover over it, and you can see now that it has a property called blue, and it's set to blue. So,
you know, Lou, right now there's a miniature fight going on between some of the programmers who are saying, well, you know, sometimes global variables are useful, or sometimes unique.
Yeah.
Global variables are useful again I use them if I'm testing something.
Yeah. If they're hidden, yeah, is right. If they're hidden fields, like for instance, I use this now. This is called a hidden field, where it stores the value of my property here, right? So that's acceptable. Like that you can use that. And so most of the time when people do this, they have different conventions. But in this case, I'm just right above my property. I have a hidden field that's storing the value of it. That's acceptable, I think. And that's not necessarily really a global variable. I guess it is in a sense, but it's just saying, hey, this is where I'm storing my value, but it's private. Nobody else should touch it but this property. Yeah.
So, the much better the much better practice would be to pass around values that you need in functions as they need them.
Right.
That's just, I mean, it's more active program, it's not so lazy, and you make sure that you don't get things like corrupted data because things are accessing global variables because you forgot that you accessed it, again, back in line 2 out of 100,000. Folks, we are now getting into that realm, and Lou deals with this on a daily basis, which is why he wouldn't even imagine using a true global variable. We're getting into the realm where you're going to have programs that have thousands of lines of code. And when you have thousands of lines of code, you need a way to keep it neat, and you need a way to have best data practices. That means that you need to pass data only when needed so that you don't corrupt it. If you use a global variable, everything has access to it. That's just asking for issues.
Yeah. I understand that.
Yeah. So Lou, all right. So let's get a little crazy here. You wanted to show us something else with the framework. We were talking a little bit about objects, about classes. People are either going to get that or they're not going to get that, and that's okay because they've got places that they can go to find out more about how they work. We've given them a general overview. Could we get a bit more back into that framework and show us some of that magic?
Sure, you got it. So one of the things we showed last week was a WPF application, and it was a little, like you said, it was a little tough to kind of copy stuff over. But I wanted to show another simple app, and actually the funny part about it was I didn't know somebody else already did an example about RSS feed. So this is another example of RSS feed, and it actually does take the Coding 101 feed. So I'm glad that a viewer already did it, but I actually did it in WPF. So, and I think their code is actually better than mine, but this will be a better example for WPF purposes.
Perfect.
So basically what I did was I set up a WPF app, and I set the background here to just be the URL to an image I found on the twit.
I hate that guy.
Yeah. So, and then all I did was drag and drop here. Very simply, I just dragged and dropped a button on here, and I changed the content to be play. And in this case, I'm going to get rid of this button because I already have one. But I drag and dropped it, and then I double clicked on it like this, and it brought me to the code behind file here. And you notice that now I have what they call an event for that button.
Right.
And so it doesn't do anything right now. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to create a separate class. This is, like I said, in coding files, I have a separate class that I call a netcast provider. And what this will do is it has a property that returns the URL to the cover art. And again, this is a class with a public property. And then I also have another public property that returns the URL for the MP3 file that you guys have post out there. And so what it does is it calls a function, just like we've done in the past, that retrieves that. And again, it uses a lot of framework code in here, so I'm not going to get into what all these do, but it's very similar to how the other example was done. We're using syndication feed, and it loads the URI, and then it calls load, and it loads the XML that comes down, and it rips through all of it and finds all the coding 101 ones, and then it rips out the audio URL. But again, the whole idea behind this is it's in a separate class called netcast provider, and when I use it in my code over here, it's just as simply as saying, hey, I want to use a new netcast provider, and I want to call the property that I created called audio URI, and it will return that. And then I basically use this framework function to execute it, which that will do is if I click on it now, so you notice the background loads up. If I click play, it'll actually ask me if I want to download it. And there's the Coding 101 episode 7 MP3.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And so the nice thing about this, what I like about this little program that you've created is how simple it is, right? Because all he did was he used a background image. So he called up a background image, and then he created a button, which was a simple process. He just dragged it over from his bar, dropped it onto the page, and then by double clicking it, he enters a page that it's a description of the event. So when someone clicks that button, that's the code.
Event happens.
Exactly. That's the code that's going to run. That's the event that's going to happen. Now, Lou, this is a pretty simple example, but I mean, this is more or less the foundation of anything that's ever done in a graphical interface, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, people think that graphical stuff has to be super complex. It really doesn't need to be. I mean, you can add, most people do. I mean, you see how web pages are today. Really, all they're doing is they're taking the fundamental framework stuff that's underneath the covers and taking advantage of it. For instance, shadows and alpha channels and all that stuff that the UI can do. They're not really doing any special magic. They're just dragging stuff on and applying special styles and stuff to it. And that's really all most GUI UIs are, other than when you're starting to build games, and that's another story. So. Right.
Now, something I will say is there are some people in the chat room who are saying, oh, it kind of reminds me of Visual Basic. Well, yeah, it does. Actually, you can use almost exactly the same methods, the same procedures to create functions in both languages, to create events in both languages. Now, anytime you're going to be programming with foundations, it's going to be a little messy because you start thinking of all the things that you can do. But one of the things you have to remember is the lesson from last week. When Lou created that graphical application, he only used code slightly modified from previous lessons. So don't freak out, folks. If you were able to do it in the console, you can do it in Foundations. It's just going to take a little longer for you to figure out how those events work.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's a little tough for me to remember how to open and make it work in Visual.
In Visual Studio.
Visual Studio for desktop.
Yeah, exactly, because it's easy to see this and go, okay, that makes sense. But then when you're sitting behind the IDE, you kind of go, wait a minute, what did we do?
How did I open that file again?
Yeah, exactly. What I would suggest, and honestly, this is a real suggestion, is sit down, download last episode and download this episode, and just have it ready to play. And really just follow Lou's steps. Follow what he does.
Play and pause.
Play pause, rewind. Play pause, rewind.
We go fast.
He tends to go a bit fast just because we're limited by time. But it really isn't that hard. And the first time that you make it work, you've had these. That moment where you hit play and it works and you're going, oh, that was it?
Yeah.
Okay, got it now.
Now I got this.
Yeah, because you start playing with the properties of the class. You start playing with the properties of the windows. And once you see how that actually works, I promise you all those misgivings about going into this higher level of programming will just vanish. Lou,
It's wonderful.
what else have you got for our newbies out there? They've been looking to you for the last 8 episodes to give them the goods on how they program. If you had a bit of advice for the novice programmer who right now is freaking out, what would you tell him? What kind of kind words of counsel would you want to give him?
So, I mean, the way I started was I used people's examples, just like Coding 101 viewers are doing. I mean, basically, we go in and I'd watch a show or I'd watch a video, or I'd go and read a book, and then I'd use the examples that came with those and tried to learn by those. And most of the time, they provide best practices, and that's the best way to do it is to follow somebody's best practices. And there's some great books out there. Like, for instance, the C# has like the C# The Good Parts, just like JavaScript The Good Parts. There's Effective C# is another good book. And they provide you with best practices for these languages. And then that allows you to kind of then understand what people are using today. Another thing is to go out onto like GitHub, like we have on our code, and find other projects. Some might be super complex, and some might be just huge applications, but they allow you to go and view how C# or this specific language that you're using at the time, it doesn't matter if it's C# or not, and to see how other people are using in the industry. And I think then you'll start to see patterns and other things that maybe you've never seen before, like classes and other things, and it'll help you learn. And I think it'll help you learn just by doing or viewing and even just compiling their stuff, because obviously it's public. So those are basically how I did it for when I was learning. So I think that's the best way to start.
Lou, thank you so very, very much. You've been an absolutely awesome code warrior, and you will always, always be the first code warrior on Coding 101.
Yep.
It is sad to see you go for at least a while, but that doesn't mean you're gone forever. I mean, you're still going to come back on the show, maybe another C# module, maybe another language to be our code warrior, yeah?
Definitely, would love to.
Absolutely. And as long as we're saying farewell, a fond farewell to you for at least a while, could you tell the folks at home where they can find you, the projects that you're working on, and what they can do if they want to learn from your example?
Definitely. So I think obviously Twitter, LouMM on Twitter, and also feel free to email me, loumm@outlook.com. I've got some great emails lately, and hopefully provided some valuable feedback to those people. And also, like I said, some other great places to view code. There's obviously Stack Overflow is a great website for C# developers who are just starting out. Some great people on there that help you out there. I participate in that website a lot, providing people information. And then also, if you want to see what I'm working on, would be crm.dynamics.com, and that's the best place to see where my work's at.
Thank you so much, Lou.
Bye,
Thanks,
Lou.
guys.
As we bid farewell to our code warrior, Lou, we are now in uncharted territory, are we not, Snubs?
We are.
We're at the end of a module.
Oh my gosh.
No.
What do we do now?
Oh my God, we dance.
Like
No,
this?
no, folks, remember, when we started Coding 101, we told you that we were going to do programming modules and then move on to another language. Now, that doesn't mean that we're just going to forget everything we did in the C#, but it does mean that we're going to ratchet down the difficulty a bit. This is the idea of a Coding 101 show. The last couple of episodes of every module should really challenge you. It should really make you freak out. And then we bring it back, and we're going to show you about variables again. We're going to show you about functions again, but just in a different language.
Because I'm sure all that stuff is just a little bit different when you hit a different code.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's different in Java. It's going to be different in Python. It's going to be different in Perl. It's going to be different in any language you touch. But hopefully what you're going to start to see as you get exposed to more and more languages is, even though the syntax may be different, the context is the same.
You're still seeing the same theoretical
yeah, constructs, right,
yeah,
right.
It's all the same.
It's all the same because it's all about taking something from the real world and solving it with code, breaking it down into simple bytes that a computer can process and turn into usable information.
Right.
I
We're
like
all
that.
going to start thinking with ones and zeros.
Yeah. Now, we're not going to tell you what our next language is yet, even though we know. But what we do want to tell you is that we're also going to do something that we had planned from the beginning, which is our wild card episodes.
Fun time.
Fun time. For the next 2 weeks, we're putting aside the compiler, right? We're not going to be worried about exercises. We're not going to be worried about code samples. What we're going to do...
This is the fun time in class when you got to watch a TV, watch a movie in class, and you just got to sleep through it.
And hopefully
I hope you don't
it
sleep
inspires.
through it.
Yeah, don't. You're not going to be able to sleep through this. In fact, Brian, if you go to my laptop right now, you're going to see the page of our first guest. He is going to be the first expert coming on. His name is Liam Kennedy. He started this Kickstarter called ISS Above that used a Raspberry Pi and some very simple Python programming to give you a signal anytime the International Space Station is above you.
That is so cool.
Very cool project, very real world. And as you can see from his Kickstarter, he only asked for $6 grand. He got $17,000.
Wow.
People actually kind of like the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of like the idea. I want to do that.
And you know what? You're going to be able to.
Yes, I'm so excited.
So when you tune in next week, actually we're going to pre-shoot it tomorrow. So when you tune in tomorrow, but next week, you're going to be able to sit down with us in the living room and speak to Liam Kennedy, ask him all about how he created that project, why he created that project, and he's even going to open up the secret door and let you see what his Python programming looks like.
Ooh, fun.
Folks, this is what we do because we love you. Now, the week after that, believe it or not, we've also got Randall Schwartz, who's going to be expressing how wonderful it is to program in Perl. And I'm hoping to get him to discuss the lawsuit with Intel all the way back. It was one of the first cases where a smart guy, a hacker, a programmer, really figured out a vulnerability in a major manufacturer's product and got in trouble for it. So he's a trailblazer for the rest of us.
That's going to be awesome.
It's going to be awesome. And right after that, we're going to show you what, we're going to give you a little snippet, a little taste of what the new language is going to be like. But until then, I think we need to tell them where they can find all our code, they can find us, where they can find Twit.
All right, twit.tv/code. That's where we have all of our show notes, we have all of our information there, and we also have links to our GitHub, as well as links to the Google Plus community where you can find viewer-submitted codes as well that we showed on the show.
That's right, we throw everything up in the GitHub. Now, the GitHub is going to change. Every time we have a new module, we're going to have a new repository. So the Coding 101 repository is going to fork. Everyone who wants to look at the program and the code for the first module will be able to look in one area, and then we're going to start a brand new area for our new programming language. We figured that was the best way to do it, right?
Yeah. Seems easiest.
Now, we don't just offer everything in our show notes and our GitHub. You could also find us on iTunes. And you know what? If you find us on iTunes, we were still new and trending I think 2 weeks ago. Jump in there, tell your friends about Coding 101, get this podcast downloaded to your device of choice each and every single week, and help us spread the word about the Code Monkeys.
We're not just on iTunes, though.
No, we're not.
We're on YouTube, too.
No.
youtube.com/twitcoding101. That's where you can comment on the show and tell us what you like and don't like. And you can watch all of them right there.
I like that. And also, why not jump into our Google Plus community?
Absolutely.
It's 600 people strong. I mean, considering how young this show is, that's a lot of people. And these are not just people who sit on the wall. These are active members. We got people like Joe for Code for Sale. He's the guy who gives us all these mugs. And he's got great ideas about how people should program. And he's always willing to lend a novice some help when they've got problems with their code. So jump into gplus.to/twitcoding101. Twitcoding 101. Do it
right now.
Do it now. Join up, and we're going to see if we can push that to 1,000 before the end of the month.
Ooh, that should be our goal.
That's our goal.
Yeah, tweet it out, guys.
Now, if they're not in the G Plus groove, that means they can't find us, right?
No, we're on Twitter, too.
Oh, yeah, the Twitters.
Of course we're on Twitter. I'm at Snubs.
And I think I'm at Padre SJ.
You think you are?
I don't know.
I think you are.
I know.
I'll check.
By the way, I know that you've had 10,000 followers like forever, like way up there. Well, I just got 10,000. I'm so happy.
Congratulations.
I have a K on my...
People like you. They're all spammers.
They're spammers.
No, I'm just kidding.
No, I checked.
Aww.
It's true. No. But you know what? If they're going to watch our show, why not watch it live? We're a lot of fun live, aren't we?
We are very fun live. You get to see our strange and awkward dance routines before the show actually starts and Brian screws up the intro.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
Exactly. If you watch live at live.twit.tv every Thursday at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, you can see us do everything in the pre-show and the post-show. You can see all the times that we mess up, everything that doesn't make it into the final edit. And as long as they're watching us live, why not join us in the chat room? You'll hear us call out the chat room every once in a while. They live right down here. They're all in that little box. They help us well, figure out whether or not people actually are understanding what we're talking about.
That's true.
We like that. We like that. So jump in there, talk to some of the people, the same people who make the G+ community so fun, and enjoy the experiment that is Twit. Until next time, Shannon, what do we say?
I'm Shannon Morse.
And I'm Father Robert Balacer.
End of Coding C# Live.